So a little fact about the lakes that Andy didn't know tonight is that there's a tug out there named the Dorothy Ann. And the Dorothy Ann is teamed up with a tremendous barge that's 3 times her size in length, almost as long as a football field. This barge is loaded with stone. And this Dorothy Ann has to push this thing up the Cuyahoga River, which the Cuyahoga word means crooked. So this is no small job. And with 7,200 pounds of horsepower and a crooked, and this huge barge. But guess what the name of the barge is? It's the Pathfinder. The Pathfinder. And I want you to stand up and give a big cheer for you know who is the Pathfinder in this room, Andy Buchsbaum, who has been working for the lakes for years. Come on, stand up and give him a big thank you cheer.
Thank you, Dorothy Ann. You know how to advance. Great, thank you. I've never actually been compared to a barge before. And I am tall, but I don't think I'm 3 times taller than you are. But I love the analogy. So yeah, I'm Andy Buchsbaum. I live here in Ann Arbor. I've lived here since, well, for over 30 years. My wife, Kathy Fleischer, was here too, and my 2 kids are born here and grown up here. And I grew up on the shores of Lake Michigan outside Chicago. So for me, Lake Michigan was always the place to go for fun, for recreation, and more than that, because whenever you're in Chicago's like on a grid, right? And when I was young, I would say to my mom or dad, I said, so what direction is that? What direction is that? They'd say, the lake is east. If you know where the lake is, you know where all your directions are. You know where you're going. And that's always been it for me. I spent a little time on the West Coast of law school. I'm a recovering attorney. And the big water was in the west, and I was very confused for the entire 3 years I was there, because the lake's supposed to be on the east. So I think in a small way, that's what we all feel about the lakes, that they are part of our personal direction, particularly those in Lake Michigan. They're part of identity, they're part of who we are. They set who we are, where we go, how we feel about the world. And that's why it doesn't matter, well, it does matter, but for us, you could be taking a thimbleful or a small bottle full of water and diverting it from the Great Lakes, or you could be taking millions of gallons a day and diverting from the Great Lakes, and we both feel those like they're our pain, because they're taking what is part of our identity, who we are. And I must say that we've done polling on this, and Michigan folks, so we talk about how Jan just talked about in terms of all of the work that she done, all the people you've talked to in Michigan. Michiganders are more like that about the Great Lakes than anyone else in the country. However, we polled everyone in the Great Lakes region, and we found that 96% of the people in the Great Lakes region felt like it was important to protect and restore the Great Lakes. 96%. You can't get 96% of the people to agree on what day of the week it is, but that's what they felt about the Great Lakes. And one of my own, really kind of impressed this to me is, let me actually tell the agenda before I tell the story. I was thinking of a talk for about 20 or 25 minutes about kind of some of the basics about the Great Lakes. Some of it you've heard, probably some that you haven't heard, because some of the really good recent scientific information. And then get into some of the major current threats. And I've got some PowerPoints on those, but I was going to pause between and after PowerPoints so that we could actually go through Line 5 and algal blooms and Asian carp, which were 3 of the most major ecological threats to the Great Lakes, and try to figure out who are the decision makers, what are the asks that we have for the decision makers, and what difference can we make for those. And for some of the other issues that you've just raised, we can talk about them and do the same thing for them as well. But I found that it's often good to think about who is it we're trying to actually influence, and what do we want them to do before we get into the actions, so we know that the actions are actually going to be meaningful. So that's the agenda. Quick story before we start. There's going to be a couple of stories here, but this one. When I used to travel all over for the Great Lakes and doing talks and conferences and the like, and one was in Perry Sound, which is in Georgian Bay, in Ontario. And I was driving there, and of course you have to go over the Ambassador Bridge and then through customs. And I don't know about you, but I get nervous when I go through customs. Like, I don't know, like I must have done something wrong. And I used to watch a lot of police and detective shows, and so I know that when you're nervous and you're being interrogated by somebody, if you say too much, then that appears that you're nervous, right? Because you're babbling. And if you say too little, it looks like you're hiding something. So all this is going through my mind as I pull up to the customs booth. And the guard there is a young guy. He's got a marine haircut. He's got aviator reflector sunglasses, and the sun's not out. It's a gray day. And I think, oh boy. So he says, completely stone-faced. He said, so where are you going? I said, I'm going to Perry Sound. He says, what are you doing there? I said, I'm going to a conference. He says, what's the conference about? I said, it's about the Great Lakes. He pauses. He says, the Great Lakes, they're in trouble, aren't they? I said, yeah, they are. He takes off his sunglasses and says, well, get out with you. So I took that to heart, and we've been going ever since. So let's get to actually some of the science and gets through some of this. You heard from the gentleman back there. You're absolutely right. The Great Lakes represent 20% of the world's surface fresh water, 90% of the nation's. So if you were to pour out the Great Lakes over the rest of the country, they'd fill the Grand Canyon and leave the continental United States 9 feet underwater. That's how massive they are. They've got 4,000 miles of shoreline, which is longer than the shoreline of either the eastern seaboard or the western seaboard. Kathy and I were up at Lake Superior and talking to one of the rangers. He said in Lake Superior alone, there have been thousands of shipwrecks, which we could believe because as we were walking down 9 Mile Beach up there, we were actually clambering over the old bones of old wrecks that were right there on the beach. They're massive, but they're vulnerable. Only 1% of the lakes every year is renewed. In Lake Superior, it takes 200 years for water on one end to travel through and out the other, which means that once something gets in the lakes, it basically stays there for generations, whether it's pollution or invasive species. And once something happens to lakes that are that large, that it happens for a long, long time. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a nice slide of the lakes because you can actually see the state borders, the provincial borders, where the basin lines are. And that's important as we think about what's happening where and how to fix it ultimately. So we're going to go through some of this in a minute. About 15 years ago, it's 15 years now, when we were trying to get the US EPA to spend more money on the Great Lakes, and the federal government to spend more on the Great Lakes, we convened a phone call. We had a conference call with the leading scientists in the region and the senior statesmen and women of Great Lakes fisheries biology. And I thought it was going to be a dry conversation, and we'd seen the government reports, and all the reports say some of the lakes are improving, some are not getting not doing. We asked this question: how are the lakes doing? It's a general question, and the scientists said the Great Lakes are facing an ecosystem meltdown. Use the word meltdown. That there's been a chain reaction degradation. That stresses and insults over a period of decades, if not centuries, have brought them to the brink of collapse. Their self-healing mechanisms have been are being destroyed. Unless we do something in the next 5 years, they'll be irrevocably damaged. So by this time, I've got the phone. I'm like, what's this? I've been working in this area for years. I haven't heard about this. Literally looking at, we didn't have video conferencing then, even if they did, I probably wouldn't know how to use it. So I'm looking at the phone and came back and said, how come we don't know about this? And the scientist said, we all know about this. We've been talking about it for 10 years and nobody's listening. So we said, well, let's do something about that. Let's write something down and publish it. So if you go to the next slide, we published this report in 2005. And it's an interesting report. It was the cover was a white sheet of paper in Word with 6 scientists listed with a report that says these things, massive ecosystem breakdowns. We asked the scientists to change the term from meltdown to breakdown because ecosystem meltdown sounded so over the top that we were afraid the advocates were saying that the scientists wouldn't be believed. The advocates were saying, you got to turn this down to the scientists. So massive ecosystem breakdown, the lake's self-healing mechanisms were damaged. What does that mean? In normal ecosystems, functioning ecosystems, resilient ecosystems, if there's an insult to stress, something happens, it kind of fades out. There might be an impact right where it is, but as you get farther away, it fades out. It's dampened. When these mechanisms are destroyed, though, an insult, it propagates. It actually magnifies, it cascades. You have a cascade degradation. And what that means is that every stress becomes the latest, worst thing that you have to deal with, or the whole system goes down. And so those self-healing mechanisms, the lakes, are the nearshore areas and the lake bottomlands, the big river mouths, the Detroit River, the Muskegon River, the Maumee River. Those river mouths used to be the places of greatest biological diversity, greatest biological potential. That's why people settled there, is because they got great fish. And we settled there, and we have since contaminated them, and there are massive changes in those shorelines and massive toxic sediments that have appeared, and those sediments and the shoreline changes, the hardening of the shorelines, the loss of wetlands, have destroyed those mechanisms, or made us go those mechanisms. So if you go, what are the stresses? They're listed there. There's many others as well, but those are the ones the scientists listed. And then if you go to the next slide, the scientists were unusual in that they didn't stop with describing a problem. They actually said, here's the solution. You restore critical elements, restore those lake beds, and the self-healing mechanism comes back. You stop the practices, the abusive practices that cause those problems in the first place. Protect what's good, and make sure to measure everything so you know what you're doing. So this paper, again, it's an 18-page Word document, plain white font. We wound up 250 scientists wound up signing it. It went everywhere. It was in 900 different publications. It was published as far as New Zealand. Congress held hearings on it. And this began the whole Great Lakes restoration process, which I'll get to in a minute, which has led to over $3 billion in federal funding and 4,700 restoration projects around the Great Lakes since Obama first took office in 2009, in the last 11 years. And despite efforts by the current administration to zero it out, Congress has restored it, and it's stronger than ever. We'll get to that in a second. So, as we go by, when they were talking about these insults, when they were talking about the damage the lake experience, what do they mean by ecosystem meltdowns or breakdowns? Let me show you one of them. There's a tiny shrimp called Diparia, freshwater shrimp, that forms the base of the Great Lakes food web. Almost every Great Lakes fish eats it at one point or another. And it's literally, you can see there 10, 20,000 of these organisms per square meter at the bottom of Lake Michigan. So the scientists toppled up and began sampling, because that's what scientists do. They just kind of sample things. He's going to sample over time these Diparia. So he started in 1994, and then click the next one, which you need. So look what happens 5 years later. This is the foundation of food web. One more click. 10 years, they go from healthy and vibrant to basically an underwater desert. One more click. 94% decline. That's the foundation of the food web. So Tom was pretty concerned. He said, what's happening in Lake Huron? He found the drop in 5 years. So he said, let's start sampling Huron. Huron, you can see in 2000, really has already suffered some significant declines in Diparia. But look what happened in 3 years, a 57% decline. Scientists still don't know exactly why this happened, but if you go to the next slide, take a look. The quagga mussel is like the zebra mussel, only larger and even more numerous. It's an invasive species. It came in and hitched a ride in the ballast water of a ship that came from the Aral Sea in Europe. And they all got here. Quagga, zebra mussels got here in 89. Quagga mussels got here a couple years later. And they got here in Lake St. Clair, so they weren't even in Lake Michigan. But within a few years, other ships had carried Lake Michigan, and look what happened. You're talking about actually in 15 years, the quagga mussels have gone from 0. They're literally at 100,000 per square meter in places because they pile on each other. That changes the surface, subsurface. It changes the filtering capacity. It blocks out certain other mussels. Go ahead, Janine, for the next slide. You'll see in Lake Huron the same way. And one more, another one. Those are zebra mussels on a buoy. You can barely see the buoy. Go one more. That's a freshwater crab. The zebra mussels coat the crab. So the zebra mussels are really already fundamentally changed the bottom. Go back, we don't want to see that picture. So that's if you ask what is the most fundamental change that's happened in the Great Lakes yet, it's the zebra and quagga mussels and the way they completely affected the energy web, the food web, and the subsurface of the Great Lakes. We can't put that genie back in the bottom. But what we can do is improve the self-healing mechanisms of the lakes so the lakes can themselves be resilient. We as human beings can't fix that. The lakes can help fix it themselves and have already begun adjusting, but that won't happen unless we fix those self-healing mechanisms. What was another insult? Gene, go ahead. How am I doing on time? The time is, it's back there, I can see it. Okay. I want to make sure I don't get carried away in the stories of this, all the good policy stuff. Those things hanging off that trout are sea lamprey. Sea lamprey are again not native to the upper Great Lakes. With some argument, they were native to Lake Ontario. They came into the Great Lakes when the St. Lawrence Seaway opened, the Welland Canal opened, and there were times when in Lake Ontario in the 50s there was a period where they were very popular to swim across the eastern part of the lake, and at that point, the lake was teeming with these critters, with these sea lamprey. And sea lamprey, as you can tell, they attach to fish, they have suckers in their mouths, and they basically suck the life out of the fish. They suck all the fluids out. And it's reported, those teeth can't get into people, so they don't suck into people. So this young woman, a high school woman, was swimming across Lake Ontario. That was her thing. It was a big deal. She was going to swim across the lake. It was a lot of fanfare, and they said, we know there's a lot of these sea lamprey in there, but they don't attack people, so don't worry. So she's swimming, and halfway through, she starts to feel the hits on her bathing suit because they can't attach to people's skin, but they get attached to whatever spandex she was wearing. So she had to swim while swiping these things off the rest of the way through. I have a colleague who said, they're not supposed to stick to people because their mouths can't do it. He's a DNR official. But he grabbed one out of a tank and said, watch this. He sticks it to his forehead here. He pulls it off, and there's a big red mark on his forehead. So, yeah, they don't suck out your, whatever, but they're still a problem for everybody. The good news here, and this is a good example, I don't want to leave only bad news. The good news here is that scientists found piscicide, a particular poison, that interferes with the reproduction of sea lamprey and nothing else. And so for the last 20 years, we've actually knocked down the populations of sea lamprey everywhere. And they're very, very rare now in Ontario and Erie, not in Michigan and Huron. They like colder water, so Lake Huron Lake Superior is where you find them mostly. So we have some good news there. Let's get rid of that picture, Janine. That's like so one of the other, I'm going to quickly go through these because we'll cover this later. Algal blooms. This is a Lake Erie algal bloom. The Lake Erie algal blooms have been really problematic. This is thick, sometimes 6-inch thick, green pea soup, oftentimes toxic. Breathing it can cause health problems. Pet swimming this will die. Certainly, people ingesting it will also get very sick. Go to the next one. This is a boat going through this algal bloom in Lake Erie. I think this is 2011. Go ahead to the next one. Again, this is the 2011 bloom. The bloom gets to be as wide as 1,000 square miles. That's how big this thing can get. Go on to the next one. I'm not sure you can see this. This is This was the 2011 bloom you just saw up there. As you look through, some of the other blooms the other years are also very large. 2017, we're going to see 2019 in a minute. These blooms are caused by excess nutrients, warmer water, and zebra mussels combined. And those are Lake Erie blooms, but they're not just in Lake Erie. If you go ahead, another one. Well, actually, let's do this first. Lake Erie, too much food causes algal blooms to the surface. That creates an oxygen deprivation in other parts of the lake. That oxygen deprivation causes a dead zone. And that dead zone, which you see that blue thing there, is very, very low oxygen levels, deep, and well, not so deep, in the mid-waters of Lake Erie, the Central Basin. That can be 10,000 square kilometers. And fish can't live there, they die. So between the algal blooms here, go ahead, you can leave it there. The algal blooms in this part of the lake, and then here in the central part of the basin, you've got these dead zones. I mean, Lake Erie is in some serious trouble, and it's all due to primarily the nutrients in the warmer water. Okay, let's go to the next one. There are algal blooms other places, not just in the town. This is a picture of Cladophora on Lake Michigan, Sleeping Bear Dunes. And we're not going to, I can get into this later because it's a longer explanation, but basically, that is an algae that naturally occurs that's fed because of a variety of factors and clear water from the zebra mussels, more sunlight, more warmth, and it's blossomed all the way in various lakes, particularly in Sleeping Bear Dunes. We had a situation where it was infected with botulism, also naturally occurring, and wound up with bird kills and pets dying on the beach in Sleeping Bear Dunes, one of the most pristine places in the Great Lakes. So we can go ahead. So let's talk a little bit about this before. The scientists published their paper in 2005. These things have been going on for the last 15 years. We have solutions. We actually have some measures that are making a difference already. Talked about, we won the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. There's a long story about that battle that I can get into. We don't have time now, but later after. But after we won that, we won the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative from Congress, which has provided $300 to $475 million per year, federal money, totaling $3 billion if you add it all up, just for Great Lakes cleanup. And that's 4,700 projects. It's done an enormous job, good, cleaning up the lake, cleaning up those lake bottoms, removing dams, new wetlands. There's a ton left to go, but we're beginning to restore the resilience of the lakes. Same time, sure, Bob.
What year did the Great Lakes Restoration start?
It started 2009. The same year as the Great Recession was when Congress, for the first time, got Great Lakes $475 million. There was actually a connection there. It's amazing if you think about it, that at a time where we hit the Great Recession was the first time the Great Lakes got this huge influx of federal money. But we were able to claim that it was jobs, and it was. It was jobs that were being created by that money directly. And it's come ever since. It's a huge bipartisan program. Republicans in Congress actually have given more money to it than Obama asked for year after year, which is the only program we know that ever happens, other than defense programs. The same year, 2008, Congress passed, well, as you mentioned, Michigan was the last state to pass the Great Lakes Compact. Congress then ratified it and made it federal law. So now the Great Lakes Compact is both federal law and state law, and either one of them doesn't do its job is violating the other. So the Great Lakes Compact is locked in. You can't violate that thing, and nobody can change it. And that is something that it prohibits diversions to California and Nevada. Can't do it. There's just a story about how somebody's trying to export groundwater from Minnesota to the west to Colorado. Well, if that groundwater was in the Great Lakes Basin, couldn't do it. It's prohibited. And not only that, anybody can stop it. There's citizen suits that would allow citizens to take action, like my organization, National Wildlife Federation. Somebody tried that, we would love to stop it. We'd be in court like that, and it would stop. Now, that doesn't stop. There are loopholes in there, which we'll talk about later, including the bottled water loophole. So the bottled water diversions are much smaller in terms of volume, And they don't affect the Great Lakes as much as they affect the watersheds they're taken from, particularly when they're taken from headwaters and springs, which is what the Nestle company is doing. We'll talk about that later. All right, so that gives you the overview, I think, much of the overview at least. We want to talk about the old and the new threats that still remain. I'm going to talk for a minute about climate change in the Great Lakes. Then I think we'll go into, I'll kind of describe a little bit what's going on with algal blooms and dead zones and break. And then we'll talk about how to fix them. Do the same thing with Asian carp, and then we're going to do the same thing with line 5. And then we can do other things as well, given the time, if we have the time. Does that make sense? All right. So let's do the climate change piece. So when I first got into this, people were saying the Great Lakes are going to dry out because of climate change. The water levels are going to sink. And as you know, the water levels did sink. But now the water levels are way up. So what's happening? What's happening is climate change has created extreme events for the Great Lakes. Either extreme drought or extreme storm. And that's the way it's going to be. There's always this balance between in the Great Lakes, between evaporation and precipitation. Evaporation increases if things are warm. Evaporation increases when there's little ice cover. But then again, precipitation also increases. Scientists don't know how to balance that out yet. They can't project that. Originally, when the scientists did a projection for what was going to happen to the Great Lakes, they actually had the Great Lakes modeled as a landmass. They didn't have the Great Lakes as lakes. We all know the Great Lakes create their own weather systems. It's lake effect snow, massive weather systems. And so there's no way you can project anything based unless you actually treat the Great Lakes as lakes. The other confounding factor is the jet stream has moved. The jet stream used to be the stream of air and weather that went from west to east in a fairly straight line across the country. Now we have the polar vortex. The jet stream goes way up into the Arctic, comes dipping right back over the Great Lakes. When that happens, we get massive ice in the lakes, stops the evaporation, lake levels go up. So lake levels go up and down, and as a result, we have flooding in Lake Ontario, flooding all over New York this year. 10 years ago, we had the people in Georgian Bay were pulling out their hair because their docks were 10 feet on dry land because the water levels were so low. We're going to continue to see those extremes, and we have to plan on that. So let's not put in hard infrastructure when the water goes down, knowing that it's going to come up. Let's make sure we have wetlands that can dampen the effects of some of the flooding that happened, and not try to put in hard infrastructure, riprap, that's just going to flood our neighbor down the stream. We have massive runoff in the spring, and if you went back to that Lake Erie algal bloom slide, those algal blooms correspond pretty closely with when there's heavy rain in the springs. So the more it rains, the more there's runoff. That runoff runs off nutrients, fertilizer basically, from farm fields into Lake Erie, and that's where you get the algal blooms. On top of that, you've got climate change that's putting in more water, so the farmers are creating more tiles, more drains underneath their fields to drain the water faster. Faster water draining also puts more fertilizer nutrients in Lake Erie. So extreme storms have quite an impact on the climate change on lots of different problems with the lake. We talked about how the whole seasons have changed. We've got more melt earlier in the spring, and that affects the way, again, the runoff comes from fields. You also got faster freezing lately in the winter because of, again, with the polar vortex. There's warmer air and drier soils, but more moisture and warmer lake temperatures. That makes a big difference. Zebra and quagga mussels, particularly zebra mussels, expand in the near shore. We have invasive species, the sea lamprey. And Lake Superior is one of the fastest warming lake in the world. It got to 70 degrees 2 years ago, the surface temperature. We know, Lake Superior hurts your head when you jump in the water, it's so cold, right? 7 degrees, it's like, I don't know, that's like the Caribbean. Well, guess who likes this? The sea lamprey. They've gone from 12 inches to 18 inches. So this is we have all sorts of water outside the normal range, water temperature outside the normal range, water quantity outside the normal range. It messes the ecosystem in ways that we can't anticipate. So that's a few of the things we're talking about in terms of climate change. I'm going to pause there and see if anybody, because I know there are questions about how this relates to climate change, how the Great Lakes relate to climate change, and I want to make sure that we cover those now. Does anybody want to talk about that more before we move on? Okay, let's go. Let's go a couple more slides. This is the algal bloom. See, I think that's the only slide I have now. This was 2019. This is the algal bloom in 2019. And so, go back to algal bloom. So we're going to stay on this slide for a bit. Okay, so algal blooms in Lake Erie. Michigan and Ohio both contribute. Ohio a lot more. Comes from nutrients, phosphorus, and fertilizer. Runs off directly from fields into drains and out, or through tiles into drains and out. It's 80% of the algal bloom is contribution of phosphorus comes from farm fields and animal farms, from the Maumee River Basin. Now, there's a major contribution of phosphorus to Lake Erie from Detroit wastewater treatment plant. The Detroit wastewater treatment plant discharges about 500 million gallons a day on a dry day into the Detroit River, which then runs in. It discharges as much phosphorus as the Maumee, but at very low concentrations. So what the scientists have determined is that Detroit does not contribute to this algal bloom. And if you look at the prior pictures, you actually see the algal bloom is pushed away from the Detroit River where it comes in here because of that pulse of low concentration phosphorus water. And down here is much higher. What that does, though, it comes out here, that phosphorus is the major contributor to the dead zone for Lake Erie. So the Detroit River, the Detroit wastewater treatment plant, that's the dead zone. The Maumee River and all the farms, that's the algal bloom. Does that make sense? Okay. So how do we stop those things? We're in Michigan. You're in Michigan. So let's think about that for a second. We can't affect the governor of Ohio. Who really needs to get off the stick and do something about Ohio farms. Michigan can produce, river raising also can produce some, not nearly as much. So Michigan has some contribution there, has it from Detroit. But Michigan can do things that help Ohio. Michigan can get the US EPA to take action against Ohio. Governor Whitmer can call for that. Governor Whitmer can say, we're going to stop permitting new massive animal farms, which are all over the basin and which contribute major amounts. She hasn't done that. Well, we're going to make those permits a lot tougher. So I'm going to ask you, yes, does somebody want to be a scribe here and start writing this stuff down? Jan, thank you. So I'm going to throw it to you now. We need to figure out who the decision maker is that we in Michigan can affect. I suggest it's Whitmer, but it could be Governor Whitmer, it could be others. Any other suggestions? Attorney General Nessel. Great idea. Did you hear her talk about this?
Probably.
Attorney General Nessel said she wants her epitaph to read Nessel v. Trump, Nessel v. Enbridge, and Nessel v. Ohio. That was the first two are. She still doesn't know how to sue Ohio, but you're right.
So the question now, the question is, can the compact which was entered into and then commingled or whatever with EPA and federal levels, can that be strengthened to deal with issues like this?
It's a great question. The question was, can the Great Lakes Water Resources Compact was about water quantity be strengthened to deal with water quality? The answer is, in theory, yes. Practically, it took 10 years to get the compact done, and that was only done after industry finally agreed to it, because we hammered them, so they had to agree. I don't see farmers agreeing to this. So I think a quicker path is to use the tools we have. We have something called the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which is an agreement between the states and the provinces of the U.S. and Canada on water quality, which does address this. There's an annex specifically. The problem is it doesn't have the same kind of teeth that the Water Resources Compact has. So for us to give it teeth, there's another thing we could do called.
What do you do to work with farmers to find other solutions?
That's a great question. Farmers could be one of some of the decision makers. There are some farmers that really want to find solutions in Ohio too, believe it or not. So that's the question. How do we incentivize farmers to do that?
Is this where it goes? I'm not a farmer. I live in a farming community, but I just came from Germany where I noticed some other people knew a little bit more about it, that they have no-till farming going on over there. And that's a solution for problems that they're utilizing. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, I got this thing, so I'm wired. No-till farming is a great way to prevent erosion, and it's really important. It helps farmers like it because it actually helps keep their soil on the farm, so it actually helps with soil health, but it also helps stop erosion in terms of environmental damage. So there's a lot of farmers in the U.S. that feel the same way, and the no-till has really caught on here. But they're still fertilizing without tilling, and so the fertilizer builds up and then it kind of runs through the tiles or off. So we need additional things, like, for example, some of the things they're thinking about with farmers is to make sure they test their soil before they fertilize. Most farmers don't fertilize themselves, the big ones. They hire folks to do the testing and fertilize for them, so make sure the fertilizer applicators know what they're doing. Because tile drains run under, and so even if you fertilize correctly, you get picked up from the other drains. You actually need wetlands or buffer strips in the drains themselves. These are all technical, difficult, non-regulatory. There is a system under the Clean Water Act. It goes back to Jack's question. Not the compact, but it's called a TMDL, a total maximum daily load, which makes me wince to think that I'm going to explain this to you. Make you wince too. Total maximum daily load is a pollution budget for any waterway that's being designated as impaired by the U.S. EPA or by the state. We had to sue multiple times to get EPA to declare Lake Erie impaired, despite all the other things that were happening. Once you have that pollution budget, you're required to identify sources from multiple states and then determine what the reductions in those sources should be. And then you have the Federal Clean Water Act behind you, which provides some regulatory authority, not enough, but some. And the challenge has been that even if you do that, you still get stuck with what do you do with farmers, because the Clean Water Act doesn't regulate farmers. But the Clean Water Act can require other sources like municipal wastewater treatment plants to dramatically reduce their load if the farmers don't lose theirs. And so you can kind of play one polluter off another, if you will. Jack?
What about working with, coming back to farmers, looking at best practices around the planet, and then create pilot programs?
It's great. They're doing that in Ohio.
Find out what works, replicate it based on your soil conditions, et cetera.
So, Jack, that's a great suggestion, and they've tried that in Ohio, they're trying it in Michigan as well. The question is, can you do best practices, pull in the best practices from around the world, figure out what works best there, and then do a pilot project and replicate it. That's exactly what they've done in Ohio. They're finding about 30% of the farmers are willing to adopt best practices. About 40% say maybe we will, and 30% say no way, because they just don't want to move. And so there's got to be something else, and that something else is what we do.
I think Rick's got
Rick, yeah.
something else.
Don't oversell me.
Sorry.
So you said TMDL just before
Yeah.
I was about to, because that's been working in the right direction in the Chesapeake.
Right.
And I've never understood why we were taking so long to get Lake Erie on a TMDL. I know politics, but it really should be there. That's the obvious solution, at least as it starts, and then everybody knows what their responsibility is. And you can get farms involved. They have been in the Chesapeake. They've been able. It's slow, because they can't be as regulated as urban areas. But CAFOs, we can definitely clamp down on CAFOs. EPA can regulate those.
Those are the big animal farms.
Right, confined animal feeding operations. 1,000 little cities of animals that are pooping everywhere. So that's a couple of areas, and one of the problem. So to get at farms, we've so far used incentive programs, conservation incentive programs to basically pay farmers to do best practices. But generally, the Department of Ag just sort of, first come, first serve. If you're willing to do a practice, go for it, and we'll pay you to do it. Some newer programs being funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative are looking at tagging the programs that the farmers will put onto the ground to their water quality benefit. So the more it benefits the Great Lakes, the more they get paid. And so it gives a real market incentive for them to do the right thing. And we're trying that in the Huron now with a new program. They're doing it in the River Raisin and parts of Ohio, as Andy said.
Rick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rick Lawson. I'm a watershed planner with the Huron River Watershed Council. And I also used to work at the Great Lakes Commission, so I've got a little background.
Yeah. So you probably don't know the Huron River Watershed Council, but in case you don't, it's probably the best watershed council in the country. It does. It's amazing what the Huron River Watershed Council does. And I've worked on and off with watershed councils in Michigan, other places in the country, and there is another one like this one. It's incredibly effective, and that's why the Huron River is coming back. Somebody asked about the Peninsula Dam. When we get to that question, I'm handing it to Rick.
We have another question from the audience.
I didn't bring it up, and I was going to ask about incentives.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So I would say that if you were looking for something to do or something to write, Whitmer, and say, this is unacceptable, this alcohol is unacceptable. I know you're not Ohio, but you do whatever you need to do to reduce phosphorus here. The Detroit water treatment plant can do better, for sure. The River Raisin can do better, for sure. And I think if Michigan were to take steps to ban new CAFOs, to ban new big animal farms, that would be a huge precedent that then we could use to pressure Ohio. And these animal farms, I mean, these are massive. The ones that are just at the threshold of regulation are 1,000 animal units per farm. An animal unit is 1,000 pounds of animal. So you're talking about 1 million pounds of animals doing what animals do. These systems, some of these pig farms are generating as much waste as a city of 100,000, 150,000, and they have no wastewater treatment. The idea is they're going to somehow find a place to spread this manure for crops. Well, the manure don't go to crops, the manure wind up going to Lake Erie, or the rivers lead to Lake Erie. So this kind of thing, this is kind of a dramatic, radical thing. I mean, National Wildlife Federation, we haven't figured out how to get behind it yet, but I think this is a little citizen action here would really help move everybody along. So that's one. We can, sure.
I want to make sure I understand you. You're saying there's no regulations on the waste products from these CAFOs?
Well, there are. The regulations are on where those products are placed and when. They're not required to have the same kind of wastewater treatment systems that you would need for human waste. And so you've got, they put in piles, they're put in lagoons, whatever, but they're not required to have primary, secondary, tertiary, like you you would if you were building a city. Yeah.
Well, with the Sierra Club a few years ago, we were lobbying in Lansing about stopping the practice of letting them put manure on unfrozen ground, or on frozen ground, and then, it still goes where it goes. But our legislators, many of them are farmers as well, who've been doing this for years, so they don't see the reason.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. She said the Sierra Club was lobbying several years ago for that. Actually, the legislature didn't do it, but several years ago, the Department of Environmental Quality under Snyder did do it. So there now is a ban on putting manure on frozen ground, fertilizer frozen ground. It's a weird ban. It's like buy from such and such a date to such and such a date. So what winds up happening is that I think it's through March 31st and April 1st, they all do it. And suddenly you get this big flush then. So I'm not sure it actually helped as much as they wanted. Ohio is going to saying you can't put manure on frozen ground or saturated ground whenever that happens, which is actually a little bit better because even though it's hard to enforce, at least you're not, all the farmers aren't dumping it the same day. But thank you for the Sierra Club. And I remember working actually with Janet Kaufman, who was with the Sierra Club, somebody who was being victimized by some CAFO near her.
Well, the obvious solution to me seems to be not buying meat.
Yeah, that is a long-term solution. It's going to take a while. I want to move to Asian carp. So let's do that one. And actually, let me ask you all: do you want to talk more about Asian carp or more about line 5? Who wants to talk more about Asian carp? Who wants to talk more about line 5? All right, we're going to do Asian carp quickly. Then we'll do line 5. Okay. So Asian carp. These are fish that escaped from a catfish farm in Arkansas when the Mississippi River flooded back in the 1990s, worked their way up the Illinois River through the Chicago canals, and now at the edge of Lake Michigan, being held back by an electric barrier, basically. I have a friend who said they eat like hogs and they breed like mosquitoes. And they've crowded out much of the fish life in the Illinois River. They make up 95% of the biomass in parts of the Illinois River. They eat everything. They're filter feeders. They don't eat other fish, but they eat all the food that other fish eat to survive. What makes them particularly interesting, and actually these are some of the few invasive species that really are photogenic, is that they have something in their ears that makes them panic when they hear a boat engine. So when you've got a boat that's traveling through a placid water that have carp in them, the carp will hear the boat and they'll panic and hurl themselves out of the water, many times into the boat. So this is a photo of silver carp that have panicked, throw themselves out of the water, and so now you have folks, when they take their boat to the Illinois River, they use garbage cans and lawn chairs as shields, so they're not knocked over the boat. And somebody was killed by one of these. A small child was killed because they're 20 to 30 pounds, like a big bowling ball, hitting you if you're going 20 to 30 miles an hour. That can be pretty damaging. So let's go to the next one. This is a big-headed carp, 100 pounds, 5 feet long. This also has the habit, if you will, or the condition that as soon as this one is threatened or dies, it bleeds and pusses all over your boat. So there's no way of taking these things and bringing them fresh to market. They're huge, gross eating machines. So let's go to the next one. So this is a picture of the Chicago canals. These fish have been working their way up the Illinois River down here this is Lake Michigan. And what makes this really complicated is that the Illinois River did not used to be connected to Lake Michigan. In the 1850s, or early middle 1800s, the Army Corps of Engineers, Chicago said, we're poisoning ourselves with typhoid and other diseases because we are discharging our waste into Lake Michigan, and then we're pulling our drinking water from Lake Michigan. So the solution at that point was not to clean up their waste, but instead, let's see if we can discharge our waste somewhere else. And so they created canals that they basically reversed the course of the Chicago River, so the river no longer carried the waste to Lake Michigan, it carried it down to the Illinois River and down to the Mississippi River. So the Chicago River used to flow this way and now be connected to Lake Michigan. In the 1850s, they dug canals and connected it, reversed it. It used to show, actually, Chicago River flew this, start over. Des Plaines River flowed this way. Chicago River was here, and it was very short. It didn't connect to the Mississippi. So they dug these canals that connects it, and now all of this water goes from Lake Michigan down to the Mississippi. St. Louis, by the way, did not like this and sued Chicago Illinois to try to stop it, and failed the Supreme Court case, and so we're stuck with this now. But over time, this has become a major feeder for industry, barge traffic and the like come through here. And so when you had big head carp and silver carp coming up, going in this direction, we said, it's obvious, we need to just shut down those canals. And Illinois said, no way, there's way too much economic growth and development here. And so instead we have these various systems that were put in place to try to slow their progress. There was an electric barrier system that was put in place. There was an old electric current that was the bottom of the canal for other purposes, to stop another invasive species from going out of Mississippi. And they said, let's augment that and stop Asian carp from coming up. And so they did that with their electric barrier system here. That's in place, but it's not foolproof. Some of the fish are pulled through on barge traffic. Some of the fish are too small to be stopped by the electric barrier. It only works for the bigger fish. And so we're still getting evidence of Asian carp in these branches here. A study said that if there were 10 adult Asian carp in Lake Michigan, there was a high likelihood they would create a breeding population. Only 10 adult carp would create a breeding population. So an isolated one here, an isolated one there, that's what's happened so far, okay. We can stand that, but if anything more comes up, then you have Lake Michigan essentially having zebra mussels that are 100 pounds and 5 feet long. That's how bad the Asian carp would be. So there's a choke point down here where we're trying to put the Brandon Road Lock and Dam, and the project is moving. It's a series of electric barriers, air bubbles, physical barriers that would stop the carp at that choke point. Great idea, right? Well, the Army Corps of Engineers got a hold of it and said it's going to cost $800 million. It's going to cost $30 million to study it, and so our members of Congress have to get the authorization for that money from Congress. So Stabenow and Peters are key, and then we have to get the governors to pitch in their share to match the money. It's not just federal money, it has to be matched by state money. So it's a long way of saying that Michigan has already offered $9 million toward the project. Illinois is balking because Illinois is afraid it's going to get stuck with the big bill. And so we have to find a way to get all the governors to basically pay off Illinois. So it's a classic Chicago problem, right? You're going to pay off Chicago. That's what they're used to there. I grew up there, I know this. So we need our decision makers there to be our senators, Peters and Stabenow, and again Whitmer, to make sure that Michigan's putting the money in, that they move this through Congress. So if you're interested, writing letters, postcards, calls to Peters and Stabenow and Whitmer on that would be really important. So it's a really complicated thing. I just glossed over quickly. Does anybody have questions about that? I know several of you were really interested in this.
Illinois senators come down on that.
Great question. Where do the Illinois senators come down on that? The main guy is Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin is the number 2 powerful Democrat in the Senate. And for a long time, he was resisting doing anything. I met with him, and he almost laughed us out of the room at one point. I couldn't figure out how to reach him. He is now in favor of this thing, this Brandon Road Lock and Dam. because he feels it won't interfere with the barge traffic too much, and because other states have to pay Illinois to get into it. So he actually thinks this could be a job creator. Rahm Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago for a time. He was actually supportive of this as well, and that helped turn Dick Durbin around. It's a good question. Anything else in Asian carp? Kathy?
I got you. So I just had a question, because when you're talking about the ask on each of these things, so an ask has to be focused in some way, right, on what's specific. And it sounds like one of the things you're saying about both of those is this sort of balance between economic reasons why somebody would want to do it, as well as environmental reasons and things that maybe some of us come in to care about.
Right.
So I guess that's when I'm thinking about next steps for some of this. Maybe some of this is if people are interested in particular ones of these, to think about what is a really smart ask that you could do. So when you're writing these letters, you're really focused on something specific, keeping in mind the need for the economic answer to something else.
It's a great point. So when we talk about an ask, it's what do you want the decision maker to do? And then you have to justify why you want the decision maker to do that. And it's often not enough just to talk about the environmental or ecological benefits to human health. It's often important for these folks to hear that economic argument. You're absolutely right. Dorothea?
So dictate a letter to us. Dear Debbie Stabenow, what am I going to, what is the next sentence? What do I say to her?
Dear Senator Stabenow.
Dear Senator
Dear Senator, thank you for your wonderful work to champion the Great Lakes. We so appreciate your leadership. We are very concerned, however, that Asian carp are making their way toward Lake Michigan. We are concerned that not enough is being done to stop them. We are concerned that there is a possible solution at the Brandon Lock Road and Dam, but it's being slowed down and stalled. Could you please do everything in your power to get that passed?
Could our senator from Michigan do something about a stall out in Illinois?
Yes. Senator Stabenow is the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee, and she is a leader of the Senate Natural Resources Subcommittee. I think she's the fourth person in line behind Durbin, so she can hold up things. She can cut deals. Stabenow Peters is already with us in this, but it helps them to hear. It's very helpful for Whitmer to hear that we'd be willing to use our tax dollars to pay for something in Illinois. That would be very helpful. So, dear Governor Whitmer, we can't thank her for being a complete leader of the Great Lakes. She's not been there long enough. But we hope you're going to be a leader for the Great Lakes because it's so important to all of us in our state. We're very concerned about Asian carp coming up and infesting Lake Michigan. We know there's this project in Illinois that would stop it. Even though it's in Illinois, we think we should use our tax dollars to do that.
Thank you. That's clear. Thank you very much.
Okay, on to line 5. The Mackinac Pipeline. This is not a shock to you, but when we found this out 7 years ago, it was a shock. There is an oil and gas pipeline lying in the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac that carries 23 million gallons a day, every day, of oil and gas underneath the Straits in 2 pipes that are 60 years old, never been replaced, brought to you, operated by the same company, Enbridge, that caused the largest inland oil spill in history of the United States in the Kalamazoo River only 9 years ago. I'm going to flip on. That's the summary. There's the pipe. That was the first time, there's a long story of how we figured this out, which we don't have time to, but I will say that one of our staff members was working on the Kalamazoo River oil spill because her family lived in Marshall, Michigan. And she had no expertise, but she was just committed to this. She learned about it, and she wondered, where else does Enbridge have pipelines? This is in 2011, and she did some research, and she found this. Her name is Beth Wallace, and she now is a nationally recognized expert on pipelines and pipeline safety. And she wrote a report called Sunken Hazard, that blew the lid off of this, and for the last 7 years, we've been fighting close to this thing out. Next slide, please. That's the Kalamazoo River oil spill. That was 1 million gallons. It's still not cleaned up. Next slide, that's the lost lake. That's the pipe that ruptured. That's a 6-foot rupture in that pipe. There are 2 lines that are 4 miles long that run under the Straits of Mackinac. They're not that exact pipe, but that's the nightmare. Next slide. And this should just let it go. This should go. It takes a while, I think, but we should see this. We asked the University of Michigan to figure out what it would look like if there were a major spill for the Great Lakes. We just figure out what this is going on here. There. It might not be good. You're not going to see it. Okay. It's this awful-looking snake-like thing that goes under from the ridge. It peels out in both directions and wraps around. It wraps around Mackinac and wraps around the coast. Goes up both coasts. It goes up to 700 miles. Oh, that's it. You're going to see that. I don't know why it took so long to do the intro to this, but here you go. So they did thousands of scenarios. That's one of the scenarios, if there were a spill there.
What's red and what's yellow?
Red is near the surface, yellow is mid-depth, and then blue is at the bottom. The blue is obviously. Red is at the surface, yellow is in the mid-level, blue is at the bottom. That would be oil. If the oil, that's from a single location, a single spill. Get it away. There's another study that's got just a static picture that says 700 miles. That's a worst case scenario, 700 miles. This is just one of many scenarios. They ran thousands. Again, University of Michigan study by the scientist who's the lead scientist in the currents, how the currents work in the Straits of Mackinac. All right, we can stop anytime. Since this broke in 2012, there's been enormous progress. This is one where this came out of nowhere, right? Nobody even knew this pipeline existed in 2012. So both parties got on board with this. The Republican governor, the Republican attorney general made this a priority of theirs, convened a task force. We asked them to do 5 things. They did 4 of them, which was amazing. We didn't shut down the lines, but everything but that. They convened a second task force. Environmental and conservation organizations run that task force as well. We were making great progress, and then they took a turn. You had the Attorney General, Bill Schuette, at the time, who ran for governor, saying that this pipeline would never be permitted if it were today. Saying that this pipeline sooner or later, this pipeline needs to come out. Its days are numbered. That's what he was saying. But the conclusion he came to was, instead of having a pipeline, let's build a tunnel underneath the straits to transport the oil. Now, setting aside all the climate problems, where in fact you're still pulling oil from the tar sands fields and letting that go, there are clearly some risks to the Great Lakes from that. Even worse, the tunnel agreement that they came up with Enbridge has Enbridge basically owning the tunnel and building the tunnel at their expense. But there's no deadline for it, and most importantly, there's no deadline for removing the existing line. So this agreement they have for the tunnel is an illusion. It's hard enough for a company that's really motivated to put in a pipeline or a tunnel. If you're not motivated, if you know that as long as you keep the existing Line 5 running, you don't have to do anything, that tunnel's never going to get built. And these lines will just keep on running forever. So that's what they did at the lame duck session when the month before Schneider left office, is they created this tunnel agreement, they created a new law, they ran over all the opposition. And now, since Whitmer and Nessel, one of the reasons they got elected was because they promised and pledged to shut down Line 5. And so Nessel began right away. She's already filed a lawsuit against Enbridge, a major lawsuit to shut this down right away. We've been helping her with that. She issued an opinion saying that whole tunnel project was unconstitutional, which has now been challenged. We're helping her with that. Whitmer has not been nearly as aggressive, the governor. She's hoping that Nessel's lawsuits will do this on their own. The reason is that the building trades unions and some of the unions who we're normally allies with have decided that this tunnel is the job security, the job initiative that they want. So you have the building trades, some of the other unions basically saying, we will oppose, we'll pull all of our support from any Democrat who doesn't support the tunnel legislation. And so we need to show Whitmer that she's a one-term governor unless she made it to her campaign promise. Now, she's begun to do some good things, but they've been slow so far. She's actually asked her Department of Natural Resources to determine if Enbridge has violated the easement that gives us permission to carry oil in that pipeline. And they have, and we're helping the DNR create the logistics for that. But the problem is it's all too slow. And Enbridge has done this massive PR campaign, literally over $10 million in Michigan alone. And they're paying off communities, and they're paying the unions, and it's just this amazingly massive thing. And so we need to find a way to overcome that political opposition with our political momentum. So that's where, Line 5, this decision maker, Nessel's already there. She's with us. We don't have to worry about her. Dana Nessel has been phenomenal on this. It's Governor Whitmer, again, who's the decision maker. We know we're good friends with the head of the Department of Natural Resources. We know he will do the right thing if the governor gives him the permission to do that. But she's got to give him the permission. So she needs to hear loud and clear from folks that she needs to fulfill her campaign promise and shut down these lines. So let's throw it open. Sure, Jim.
So let's say that you went ahead and were able to shut down the line. Who's using this oil and gas, and how does that impact them?
Great question. And yeah, Jack, you're right. Not Jack, sorry. Mark, you're right. It's Canada.
The Indians don't want to go on their land. They want to cut through
Michigan, they've had a 50-year lease to do it.
Yeah.
It goes down to, was it Sarnia?
It goes Sarnia and Marathon. So what happens is, from Marathon, then it goes across into Windsor.
And then there's an underground pipeline all the way through there that's also probably
It goes right through Sarnia. Yeah. So I've got this one. The answer is that 70 to 80% of the oil, it just passes right through Michigan. 20% goes to 15% goes to Marathon Refinery in Detroit, and the Marathon Refinery gets tons of oil from the pipeline that Eruption was rebuilt, Line 6B, the line that goes through Kalamazoo. So it's got alternative sources. The major use that the pipeline has for Michiganders is it provides propane, small amounts of batches of propane to the UP. So we've done studies how to replace the propane. We've asked independent economic and it's one rail car a day would replace all the propane that Enbridge carries to the UP, or several truckloads. And basically, it's a facility in Rapid River, which is basically truck it there. If you built a 1 mile rail spur, the rail car could get there, and if not, you just truck it. So there's plenty of propane, plenty of calcium propane. That's really it. There's a refinery down in Toledo that gets a lot of its oil from Line 5 right now. And we're trying to figure out if they have alternatives, but that doesn't affect Michigan.
There was a ship anchor that caught the line, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, nearly tore a hole in the line.
It's a year ago.
A year ago. No one owned up to who it was. Somebody was dragging an anchor along.
Did everybody catch this? Because this is really important.
And then the line was supposed to be supported. It was designed by somebody over 50 years ago. The life of the line was 50 years. It's now over 60.
65. Yeah.
And he had said that it had to be supported every, I don't know what it was, 100 feet or 200 feet.
75 feet.
And there are long spans of it that have no support at all. So there's lots of risk factors. I remember going to a presentation at the UP, and then a guy who worked for Dow Chemical, and he says, I design pipelines. This pipeline has got to go.
Ed.
And he
It was
had
Ed.
all kinds of design pictures and everything, and it was very alarming.
It's really scary. Yeah, Bob.
I just wonder if there couldn't be a page out of the clean water strategy they have for farmers where somehow incentivize it. Just on the surface of it, it seems like putting a new pipeline similar to the old one would be, I mean, I'm not advocating it, but it seemed like it would be so easy for Enbridge to do it. And then, of course, maybe regulations are much different now. I just have trouble understanding why they're so attached to that one. Why not just go ahead and do something and upgrade?
So that's actually a great question. And I mean, if you take away the carbon impacts and CO2 impacts, I mean, there is a win-win for Enbridge and for and for the state on this. The tunnel they're talking about building is like a channel. It's like 100 feet underneath the bedrock or underneath the surface or underneath the bottom of the straits. It would be 10 feet wide. So you could have dual pipelines down there, and you could have humans go down there and monitor it, so you actually could see if there was a leak and you could repair. So the idea would be, you would basically tell Enbridge, you have 3 years. We're going to shut down Line 5 in 3 years. If you want to build this tunnel, you have 3 years to do it. That's it. And if you don't get it done at that time, we're still shutting down Line 5, and then if you get the tunnel done later, you can restart it. But that's it. That creates the kind of incentive you're talking about. But as long as those lines are allowed to go indefinitely, that won't happen. And there are other reasons to shut down Line 5 besides the straits. Like if you look, Line 5 runs all the way along here, and there have been multiple 40 ruptures of Line 5 historically on the land side before it gets to the straits. All that risks those are all damaging to the lakes as well. It runs through here in Wisconsin, right around here. It runs through the Bad River area, where the Bad River tribe has its sacred lands, and the line is destroying. It's basically it's turning the river and becoming exposed, risking a major spill there. It's the same 23 million gallons that goes to the straits. And Enbridge's solution is to bring in major industrial equipment to repair the line, which would destroy the native rice beds, which are the sole source of kind of food and economy and religion for the tribes. So we're actually working with the tribal lawyers there. They don't want a tunnel. They want to shut down entirely. So there are other factors at work. But yeah, you could, in terms of the straits, build a tunnel.
Ann and I went to the Great Lakes Commission meeting at the Weber Center, and Dana Nessel spoke that day, said that she found out when she became Attorney General, there are 38 lines under the straits. It's not just this one pipe.
Well, I didn't know there were 38, but the other ones aren't carrying oil and gas. They're electrical, they're transmission, but they're not carrying oil and gas.
So if those lines broke, the lakes would be okay?
The lakes would be much smaller. They wouldn't be okay.
No, the lakes would be okay.
Well, the lakes would be okay.
The lakes would be
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, they'd be okay.
It's only this one that would be dangerous
The
too.
dual lines, yes.
Yeah,
I'm Elijah. I've just been nominated by the mayor of Ypsilanti to the Huron River Watershed Council. I'm just wondering, I was in law school for a couple of years. Can you require Enbridge to carry insurance in case there was an oil spill? And of course, that'd be prohibitive, and they would very quickly switch away from that.
That is a great question. So, and I'm going to give you I'm going to try to run through this quickly. The easement in 1953 required Enbridge to carry insurance. It required them to carry $1 million of insurance. Yes. And so start there. So since then, and that's all they had until 2012 when we exposed this. Since 2012, they've claimed that they now have way more indemnity than they're fully covered, and they've put their organizational assets on the line. But 10 days ago, the Attorney General released a study that they commissioned that showed that all the commitments that Enbridge had made were made through a subsidiary that was legally separate from the parent company. And the subsidiary doesn't have any assets other than the line. So this is a big thing. The parent company has avoided its own liability here. So you're absolutely right. There's no way they can get insurance. What they normally do is they pledge the assets of the company as long as the assets of the company are healthy or okay. But of course, if there's a spill and there's all this liability or a spill somewhere else, then those assets, that collateral can disappear in a heartbeat. So they don't get insurance the way normal people get insurance. Lloyd's would never insure this thing. It's a great, and I think that's one of the reasons they're in violation of the easement right now. One of the many. And as far as I'm concerned, if they're in violation, well, the easement says if they're in violation and they can't cure it, then the government can revoke the easement. And that's what we want the government to do.
Andy, I have a question for you. So I appreciate your focusing on us on what actions we can take as individual citizens in terms of reaching out to encouraging our elected officials to do the right thing here. Are there coalitions or alliances that we should also consider putting our voices behind?
Sure.
And could you give us some examples of?
Sure. For Line 5 was easy. There's, of course, the National Wildlife Federation, the League of Conservation Voters, Michigan League is doing great work on this. There's a coalition called Oil and Water Don't Mix. Oil and Water Don't Mix. It's run up out of Traverse City. They're doing great work on this. One of their leaders is Sierra Club is Clean Water Action both in there, but also a group called Flow for the Love of Water that's doing some really good work on this as well. And so there's a lot of groups that are really jumped on this and doing excellent work.
And in terms of the indigenous communities and work that you mentioned, are they organized in some way from a coalition perspective? Is that
well, there's GLIFWIF and there's CORA, which are the two. CORA is one set of tribal nations, and GLIFWIF is another, but the tribes are sovereign nations, so they don't work in coalitions like environmental organizations do. So this would be the Bad River tribe is the one that's carrying the weight on this. And Bad River's in Wisconsin, and their lawyer is, their attorney is a guy based in Ann Arbor named Riaz Kanji. And if you want his contact information, they do need financial support. They're involved with massive litigation right now with Enbridge. They just sued Enbridge. They had given Enbridge easements over their tribal land. Some of the easements expired, and they told Enbridge they could no longer use those easements. And Enbridge just said, well, then we'll just go around. But meanwhile, Enbridge is contesting the termination of the easements. And so they actually had to sue Enbridge. They've got a lawsuit going against Enbridge, which is highly technical because it's all about tribal law, not about energy or environmental law. And so they need help.
Thank you.
Jack?
Does your website or your organization have
links to these types of organizations or what's not?
We should. It's www.nwf.org /Great Lakes.
Just go on this blog.
You get it? Okay. Yeah, and if you don't, you've got my email, just email me and I can get you those. But yeah, we generally link to those. And yeah, there are coalitions also for algal blooms. The algal bloom coalitions are kind of odd because they're kind of Ohio and Michigan, and so there's no one that goes everywhere. National Wildlife is good for that. Freshwater Future, the Alliance for the Great Lakes are all good organizations for that. Ohio Environmental Council is great. They're doing some good work on this too. And then for Asian carp, there's an organization that's it's a coalition based in Illinois. We can, again, our website should tell you some of the organizations that are involved there. So we didn't cover a lot, and we're just about out of time. But we didn't cover microplastics or Nestle or, Jack.
I have a whole separate question.
Okay.
And that deals with Lake Superior and what happens, what are the consequences of drawing down to the old water?
Drawing down to the old water.
Of Lake Superior. You get down to certain levels, I don't recall the depth, and you're into old water, it doesn't change, it doesn't go anywhere.
I've been saying the same thing. That's a question I haven't heard before. I don't know. So what Jack is saying is that, if you put water in one side of the Duluth, it takes 200 years to make it the other side, but that's kind of toward the surface. There's old water, Lake Superior, that's the original glacier melt from 10,000 years ago. That's why Lake Superior is sacred. That's why if you're kayaking Lake Superior and you're in some of the deep parts, you're floating over 10,000-year-old water that's been there since the dawn of the Great Lakes. It's amazing. Do you know that, are they tapping into old water?
It was one of the concerns raised if they were going to draw water up for the western states.
Okay.
Exposing that.
So Jack said that, you're right. In 1998, there was a proposal, several proposals to take Lake Superior water to western states or to Asia. The compact stopped that. So that is no longer a threat. But if you hear of any other time or any other occasion where they might be pulling out that old water, let me know, because we got to get on that. Because I don't know what the consequences would be other than the massive spiritual consequences. Because I was talking about the Great Lakes as being part of our identity, but I like the way Jan talked about them being sacred, because
They are sacred. I feel they are.
Thank you.
And we've done what we hope to do. We've started a fascinating conversation, and it's 16 of the hour, and they want us to start getting our coats on at 15 of the hour. So take a lot of these cards, pass them out to everybody. That link, that internet link, will give you 7 of Andy's favorite links that he gave us, and those links lead to links, and so on and so forth. We want to keep the conversation going. We want to get it to your Thanksgiving dinner table with your family. Talk about it all year long. We have 1 week before we eat dinner with a lot of people, and then we have 1 year before we vote, which is our tremendous tool to get the right candidates going who care about the whole climate environment thing. Yes?
Gary Peters is very threatened.
Gary Peters is threatened in his run for office? Okay.
And so anybody you can talk to, that's important.
Good.
To lose him to the candidate that's on the opposite side of that would be awful.
Yes, Gary Peters
And
is precious. So
he's been a phenomenal champion for the Great Lakes.
Yes, so we can't let him lose. Okay, there's positive work for us. All right, sweethearts, thank you so much for coming out.